Good morning. Okay, so I'm coming to you from a little bit of a different spot in my living room today. That's just because it'll be more helpful for me to be here to show you some stuff later on in this video than at my desk. So, yep, here I am on the floor of a different corner of my living room. Alright, so today you have an activity that I'm gonna put up right after I, finish this video and get that up. And you're gonna be kind of assessing like some collection of your belongings, and I'll give you more guidance about that. But before you do that, it's really helpful to kind of understand a little bit about materials and the different materials that an item can be made of, because understanding what an item is made of, it's really helpful in kind of guiding you to make decisions about what kind of thing to buy in the first place, if you're kind of before you purchase something. But then also once you have something, knowing what it's made of can help you make decisions about what to do when you no longer want this item, and how what are the pathways of getting rid of it. Okay, so all right, so materials 101, and then I'm only going to cover these like 6 sort of categories of materials, and for some, alright, materials, it's a really complicated thing. In fact, there's a whole branch of science that's devoted to it called materials science, but and I had to take that class once for like a whole semester, but because I don't want this to be a whole semester class, I'm just trying to do this in like under 20 minutes, I kind of grouped some things together, made broad categories. So I just want you to know that like the materials that I'm talking about in these broad categories, they're way more nuanced than I'm really talking about, and there's really more categories inside categories. But because I don't want this to be too complicated, I just want to like kind of hit some of the basics so you have a general idea of, to have a general framework of thinking about what things are made of. So we're going to talk about metal, glass, plastic, ceramic, wood-based, and textile. Alright, so metal. You recognize metal items because they're generally shiny and reflective. So, like these are my apartment keys. So like, these are made of metal. Common forms would be aluminum for your foil, or the soda cans are made of aluminum. Steel, stainless steel. A lot of items made of stainless steel, especially in the kitchen. You get metal by mining for it from the earth, and you mine for something called ore, and the ore has metal in it, and then you just sort of melt the metal out, just because each metal has a specific melting temperature. So I think metal is probably the easiest for us to recognize. Alright, so then for each category, I'm gonna list some potential pros and potential cons. And the reason I put the word potential in front of it is because when we think about a material, especially on the front end of like, we haven't bought something yet but we want to buy something, and we're thinking about, what kind of material should we look for that item that we're trying to purchase. Different materials, because of their characteristics and strengths and whatnot, are better suited for different purposes. And so that's why I put the word potential, because a metal might have a characteristic that could be helpful, could be a positive aspect, depending on what you're trying to use it for. And another characteristic about the material could be a negative effect, depending again on what you're trying to use it for. So when we talk about pros and cons, we're going to talk about like both, how it can be used and like its usefulness in different regards, but also from a sustainability standpoint, and whether or not it's easy to recycle or decompose or something. Okay, so for metal, one of the really nice aspects of it is that it can be recycled pretty much without altering its properties. So as you recycle it, it doesn't degrade its quality. It'll still act like a metal and do its metal things. So like that's why when you have like your aluminum cans, your soda cans, you should always recycle, because aluminum it can be recycled pretty much indefinitely, and it doesn't really break down as you continue to recycle it. So like it should never go into landfill, because if aluminum can goes into landfill, it's basically stuck there until unless someone like dug it out of the landfill, which is probably never going to happen, and it's just stuck there when it could have been recycled and made into a whole new can, instead of trying to mine for more aluminum ore. Same with steel. Steel is not, it's pretty cost effective considering like how if you recycle it and then like remelt it and then reform it into something. Like steel is really good for recycling. Like it's really cost effective. Other properties about metal: it's long lasting, so it's probably not going to break. Like if you have I have a metal water bottle. I've had it for years, and I'm probably gonna have it for years, because it's like it doesn't, like, I've dropped it on the ground and everything, and it it dents a little, but like it's pretty durable, pretty robust, gonna last a long time. So that's another really nice thing about metal, is that if you have something metal, you're probably not gonna have to buy a new one for a while, and so that's less that you have to consume. Potential cons for metal: it's opaque, meaning you can't see through it. That could be an issue if you wanted something that you wanted to see through, like, I don't know, a measuring cup or something like that, or I don't know, but it could be a potential con. Metal is very conductive. It's one of its characteristics, and really this is only a con if you want something that can be put in the microwave. Metal can't be put in the microwave. So if you're getting like a metal Tupperware, like a metal container for food, you just have to know that there's nothing wrong with it. You just have to know that you can only put cold food or room temperature food in there. Like you can't put anything that's supposed to be heated up, because it can't be heated. It can't be put in the microwave. The other thing about metal: it doesn't biodegrade. It's not going to break down. Well, it doesn't biodegrade because it's not made of an organic material. But what I meant is it's not going to decompose. It will just kind of exist forever. That's why it's really important to recycle your metal things. Glass. Oh, I don't have a glass. Oh, yeah, I do. Mason jar, glass. Glass is composed of silicon dioxide, just kind of, linked together in a little bit of a crystal form. The source of glass is sand melted down at a really high temperature, so it turns into a liquid, and the liquid sand is your glass. Properties: it's transparent, so you can actually see through, unlike metal. It's strong, right? Like it doesn't bend if I squeeze it. It's non-porous, meaning it can hold a liquid and it's not going to let the liquid seep through, making it really ideal if I want to like hold liquid in it, like a broth or a soup or water even. So potential pros: it's transparent, which can make it really useful, like if I want to put something in it and then leave it in the fridge, and I easily know what it is. I don't always have to open it to check what it is or something. It can potentially be indefinitely recycled, and I worded this kind of weirdly because depending on some glass looking items are actually like some sort of mixture, and they can't actually be recycled the way that other glass products can. So that's just a little bit of a caveat, but in general, glass can be indefinitely recycled. It doesn't lose its properties with recycling. It doesn't degrade over time, just like metal, how metal doesn't degrade over time when it's recycled. So that's a really nice thing about glass, and that's also why you should always try to recycle your glass bottles and stuff like that. An example of glass that you kind of have to be careful of, it doesn't really recycle the same way, is stuff like Pyrex, those like glass Tupperware. If it's like if it's a glass that's made to be heat resistant, like you could put it in the oven and whatnot, it's not exactly, it's just a little different, so it can't like be thrown into the same recycling batch with other glass, because it can kind of contaminate some stuff. So there's a little bit of caveat, but for the most part, glass is indefinitely recyclable, which is great. Potential cons, it's easily broken. You know, if I dropped this, it might shatter, and so maybe a little bit of a hazard. It can be heavy, right? Because it's kind of dense. Just like metal, it exists basically forever. It's not really going to decompose or break down, and so that's why we should take care to recycle our glass products so that it can be, you know, made into new glass items, and we don't have to like use up more sand to make glass that is just going to continue existing on our planet. Okay, ceramics. Ooh, I should need to move my face up. Okay, ceramics is kind of a alright, this is kind of a weird category because it's a little bit of a it's more defined by what it's not than what it is, and so ceramic is not a metal and it's not organic material, and it was kind of hard to just, you know, do one broad category of ceramics because there's a lot of things that classify as ceramic that don't necessarily act the same. But in general, ceramic is just clay mixed with water, and you fire it at a high temperature, and it turns into, you know, like pottery. So yeah, common forms: pottery, bricks, porcelain, mugs. So like this mug that I'm drinking out of, this is considered a ceramic because before it was painted and then, you know, glazed over and whatnot, it was probably made from clay with water, and, you know, just like, you know, those birthday parties you went to as a kid. Well, I went to birthday parties as a kid where you get to like make something and then you paint it and then they fire it in a kiln and then you take it home. All right, so pros about ceramics is they're very hard and durable. You know, just like with glass, this is not going to start like deforming or bending if I'm gripping it really tightly. Low toxicity. This is probably like the best trait or the best pro about ceramics is pretty much, I mean, it's clay and water. There's nothing toxic in it. There are no toxins in it. So it's nothing that's dangerous to the environment. But the reason I say, well, actually I'll get to that later. And the other thing is that because, you know, ceramics are made by, you know, firing in a kiln, they can withstand really high heat. Cons: brittle. Again, just like with glass, if I dropped this cup on the floor, it'd probably break. There aren't really any developed recycling strategies. Like, you can't recycle ceramics. And this is not horrible because ceramics are non-toxic. Although the caveat is that, you know, for this to hold water and not have water like soaking out of it, a glaze is put on the cup. That's why it's shiny, and that's also why you can paint it. And I mean, nowadays, you know, toxins like lead and whatnot have been phased out of glazes, but depending on what's in the glaze, it may or may not include some toxins or whatever, or just, you know, something that might be hurtful to the environment. But for the most part, that's not really an issue anymore, and for the most part, ceramics are considered non-toxic. Okay, plastics. This is kind of also a very, like, when I say plastic, it's a very large category, and it's kind of difficult to name any characteristic about it just because there are so many different kinds. The thing about plastics is it's a polymer, which means plastics are made of repeating units, and they're generally carbon and hydrogen based, although some plastics don't really have hydrogen much in it, but definitely carbon. And the repeating unit, because I said it's a polymer made of repeating units, the repeating unit, if you just kind of modify the repeating unit, it basically allows you to make many different kinds of plastics, and those different kinds of plastics have many different characteristics, like a plastic bag versus saran wrap versus your plastic Tupperware versus a PVC pipe. One's, you know, plastic bag is super like wavy and will will blow in the wind. PVC pipe will not blow in the wind. So depending on what you do to how you make the polymer, you could have really different characteristics. And plastic is probably the most prevalent material that we have in our lives. An example is, this is my husband's. He likes to collect these Pop Funko things. So, and I can just tell just by feeling it, it's, you know, made of plastic. And usually, like, the way I identify plastic is it, like, if I hit glass, let's say, it makes, you know, like that kind of high-pitched sound. Even ceramic, it kind of makes more of a tinkly sound. But plastic just has more of a dull sound. I don't know. Like, that's, for me, that's kind of how I help myself identify, like, materials. It's just like what it sounds like when I'm, like, hitting it. Anyway, the nice thing about plastic is usually it's lightweight. It's pretty inexpensive to make, which is why it's so ubiquitous in our life. It can be really useful for hygienic purposes. A lot of hospitals and whatnot, you see a lot of like plastic just because it kind of helps. It really helps to like create a barrier between things and separate things. It's extremely versatile, like I was mentioning. Like, there's so many different kinds of plastic. But potential cons: potentially toxic. Kind of depends on how the plastic is made, or what's in the plastic. Limited recyclability. As you know, some plastics can be recycled, you know, especially if it has that little triangle and a number in it. But plastic is going to degrade over time. You cannot recycle it indefinitely, because each time you recycle, it gets a little weaker, a little more brittle, and will eventually stop being useful. Off-gassing. Off-gassing is a process where maybe the sun's UV rays, it lands on some plastic, it breaks a few bonds in the plastic, and then the plastic starts releasing methane and ethylene gas or something. And remember, we talked about methane being a very potent greenhouse gas that can do a lot of damage in trapping heat. So that's off-gassing. I can post a video in the description that it talks more about that if you want. And microplastics. As a plastic, you know, it's going to break down into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces and keep breaking down forever. And then as it gets small enough to like the micro size or the nanometer size, tiny little plastic speck, it can, you know, just be floating in the ocean, and it's too small for any of our, you know, water cleanup systems to really catch. And then, you know, some marine animals might start eating these microplastics, and then it's just going to start accumulating in these marine animals, and then the next person up the food chain eats that marine animal, and then basically is also consuming plastic from the, you know, its food, and then that goes all the way to us because we're at the top of the food chain, and so then we end up consuming plastic through the animals that we eat as well. So that's another thing, microplastics. Okay. Wood-based, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We get wood-based items from trees. I got a wooden bookshelf here. So, you know, paper, cardboard, wooden furniture, stuff like that. Potential pros: it's a renewable resource because, you know, we get it from trees. It's easily decomposed because it's biodegradable. You just throw it back in the ground. And it can be a sustainable source of material if trees are harvested ethically. Potential cons: it's easily decomposed, as I said, which means it is susceptible to rot. You know, if it gets wet or something like that. That's why you shouldn't leave your tables wet. It can warp the wood. So it's not meant to be long-lasting like metal, you know. It burns easily, so if you live in a wooden cabin and that caught on fire, it's susceptible to fire. And depending on how the trees are harvested for these wooden products, it could contribute to deforestation, which is why you should watch for these certifications, particularly FSC, which is, I always forget what it stands for, Forestry something certification. And then SFI is Sustainable Forestry Initiative. SFI is more American America and North American based certification. FSC is the most probably well-known, broad, most rigorous certification. So definitely if you see something that says FSC on it, it's pretty safe choice for like sustainability and ethical purposes. Okay, textile you may not have been familiar with. Textile just means anything that's cloth based. So like your clothes and your stuffed animals. I have a pillow. This would be considered a textile. Anything that's pretty soft and comfy to put on to like rub against your skin or something. Okay, so there's two different sources of textiles. Some can be naturally grown. You actually grow it out of the ground, like cotton, wool. Well, okay, you don't grow wool out of the ground. It comes from a sheep, but like it's a naturally occurring textile source. Hemp is something you can grow. And then some textiles are synthetically made. We have synthetically made, cloth fibers, such as polyester, acrylic, spandex. So that's why I kind of, put two sources for the for textiles. And depending on the source of the textile for your item, it could have potential pros or cons. If it's if it comes from the ground or an animal, it could be organic and renewable because you can continue growing cotton and that's fine, and it will biodegrade. So stuff like wool, cotton, hemp, that can biodegrade, right? Because it's an organic substance. But potential con, ethical labor. So especially with the textile industry, the clothing manufacturing industry, ethical labor can be a really big, tricky, sticky issue. Especially just because a lot of our clothes are just made in developing countries that we don't really have much interaction with, and so we're kind of a little bit far removed from our clothing manufacturing. And so sometimes there are issues with just ethical management, like paying the workers a fair wage, or just making sure that the workers that are making our clothing are in safe conditions and whatnot. Ethical practices also applies to, like, if you're harvesting wool from a sheep, to make sure you're treating the sheep ethically and you're not doing anything that's a danger to the sheep or a detriment to the sheep's quality of life or something like that. So ethics with harvesting and manufacturing is sometimes a potential issue. And then a lot of times our clothing or other textiles, they're made of a mix of materials, like maybe it's cotton and polyester, and when they're mixed together like that, sometimes it's hard to separate. It can be hard to separate the two different materials out, and that can make it hard to recycle. And textile recycling does exist. It's just a little hard to come by. And even when you do find the textile recycling places, sometimes it's hard to. Sometimes it can be difficult to actually like recycle textiles, just because of what I said about a mixture of materials. Okay, so that was all I wanted to say about materials. Sorry, I meant that to be like shorter, but maybe it's just never as short as I expect it to be. Okay, so I'm gonna have you do an activity where you're basically going to pick a location. So you're gonna pick a location in your house somewhere, and like I'm gonna post a document that looks just like this. Like there are some instructions, and then you have a chart here that says item, materials, and then pathways for removal. Do not worry about the pathways for removal column for today. Like just leave that last column alone. Only focus on writing down items and then materials. So okay, I'm gonna go back to webcam. So pick a location that has very clear boundaries. Do not say, oh, I'm gonna take an inventory of my entire living room. You're not gonna have any fun doing that. You're gonna get very overwhelmed and then be frustrated and then be mad at me. I want this to be an activity that is actually, just kind of interesting to you and can be, somewhat enjoyable to you. So remember that the purpose of all these activities is gaining awareness. So you don't need to take an inventory of your entire bedroom just to gain a more awareness. I mean, you would, but like that's not necessary. So the reason I'm here on the floor is just to show you an example of this top shelf of my bookshelf that tends to have like knickknacks and other things. This would be an ideal location. So like, oh, I'm gonna list all the items that are on this top shelf. And your location should have at least 10 items. And if it has more than 10 items, you can list 10 items if you want. You can list more if it's not too much of if it's not trouble for you. You can list 12, 15 items. I don't care, as long as it's at least 10. So then you just, one by one, you pick up an item, and then you're like, oh, okay, what is this? This is a pig finger puppet. I was born in the year of the pig, so I have a kind of like a bunch of pig paraphernalia that my mom would buy me for my birthday and stuff like that. Anyway, so I would write this down in item number 1, pig finger puppet, and then in the materials section, the middle column, what is this made of? So we went through a bunch of different materials so that you would have a better idea of how to answer, what is everything made of. And if you don't know for sure, just take your best guess. This is more about you just trying to gain more awareness about how you could analyze your own items in the future. And then, so yeah, you're gonna go through that. Another potential. This is like, oh gosh, my husband and I, we each have our own like junk drawers. So this is mine. And so maybe I would just go through everything in here. There's not that much stuff in it. And then I would just like list all those items and say what they're made of and stuff like that. Yeah, so do your best to, try to identify the materials that they're made of. Like I said, you can use different things like what it looks like or what it sounds like when you tap it to help you make a decision. It doesn't have to, like, don't stress about getting like, oh, like, I don't know if it's this or this. Do not worry about it. That's not the point of this activity. The point of this activity is just to get you thinking about what this is probably made of, which will be, useful for what we're going to do tomorrow as a, like, part 2 of this activity. So hopefully you actually, like, just have some fun with this. I would recommend, picking something that has a lot of, like, maybe, different items. Like, I would not do this shelf of the bookcase because it's just books. That would be extremely boring. It'd be like item number 1, book. Item number 2, book. Maybe like your desk or the top of your dresser or something like that. I think that would be much more interesting to you, just to kind of look at the items you have and kind of try to figure out what they're made of. Okay, so hopefully that's not too bad. And then I'll put up another video tomorrow that's really short and just kind of giving some instructions about what to do for tomorrow's activity. Okay, have a good day. Have fun with this. Really try to have fun. Don't make this overwhelming for yourself. If you're getting overwhelmed, you're not doing it right. Okay, I'll talk to you later.